Oh man.
Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the serverless panel for full stack development. We're joined by an awesome panel today. And to kick that off, I'll go ahead and do an intro for myself. My name is Ryan Jones. I'm the founder of Serverless Guru. I'll kind of be the DJ and host of this session here. We've got a whole bunch of exciting topics, but without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the panel itself. Benoit, Michael, Ro, Paul, do you all want to each give an introduction about your backgrounds?
Hey everybody, Michael Liendo here. Brian says he's a DJ, but I have the DJ colors, so I'll let you decide who is the actual DJ. But I'm a senior developer advocate over at AWS. I focus on a lot of front-end topics mixed in with serverless, which makes me a great fit for the Amplify team. So you can typically find me on Twitter, Discord, LinkedIn, TikTok. I'm trying to do TikTok, but we'll see how that goes. But yeah, that's a little bit about me, and I'm looking forward to the panel today. I'll pass it over to Paul.
Hey everyone, good morning, good evening, good night. My name is Paul Chin Jr. I'm a community taught serverless developer. I've been doing things in the cloud now for a few years, and really excited to be a part of this panel. I'll throw it over to Ro.
No, Ro, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Yeah. My name is Sorocious Nzimofo. I'm a serverless developer at Serverless Guru, and I'm also an AWS Serverless Hero. Thank you.
Right. Hey, I'm Benoit Bourret. I'm service developer at Service Guru. Been a AWS community builder since last year as well. Doing plenty of stuff, especially with AppSync. Today we're going to talk about it, I guess. And so yeah, happy to be here today and looking forward to this amazing talk.
Okay, well, with that, let's go ahead and introduce some of the topics that we're going to be covering today. The first one will be what the new full stack developer looks like. So we're the end of May 2022. It feels like early 2020 was yesterday, but we've survived. We got through. So what does that look like? What does a full stack developer look like in May 27th of 2022? Also AWS Amplify for production. So how can you use that to potentially solve your problems or at least jumpstart things depending on the perspective? Event-driven applications for front-end developers. So how are front-end developers making a splash in event-driven architectures? And we'll talk about that too. So to kick off the first topic, really exciting. What does the new full stack developer look like in mid 2022? And for that, let's go ahead and jump with Michael Liendo. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love this topic, right? Because it's constantly evolving. And from my perspective, from my bubble of the ecosystem, the workload is getting more intense, but the tooling around it is making it easier. So we have this nice balance of I have to do more, but it becomes easier to do that. I do want to throw it back to maybe, 10 years ago now, when Node.js came out, right? Because that's what really got this front-end developer ecosystem into the back end. And it started off with great tools like Express, but we had this server-full mindset where I need to build up my application, host it on Heroku or DigitalOcean, and I kept this server that was always charging me and always making it so that I had to have something that could potentially break down the road. And when it broke, I had to fix it. Now, to bring it full circle, a lot of great tooling came out of that, right? We have Gatsby, we have Next.js and Netlify, and they gave us this whole concept of serverless functions. So now I could be a front-end developer, still work on the back end. I'm full stack, and I have this cool little functions folder or whatnot that I could always tie into to create my API. I think that was great. That was a good start. But I think the miss was that feature became a product of the platform, right? And it never became a product of the cloud. So now we're in this flux where you're a front-end developer, you can do full stack, but you think that serverless function isn't a part of AWS or whatever cloud provider you're using. We're going to bias towards AWS here. It was something that the platform itself gave you. You know, I have a backend function. It's a Lambda. It's a serverless function, but it's Netlify's thing. And now we're sort of in this educational point where we have to teach others how that all comes full circle within the context of the cloud.
Yeah, no, I love that.
That's my ramble.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, thank you for the history there too. I think something that's really interesting about it is that it feels like there's been traditionally, when you're talking about servers and maybe 5 years ago, there was more of a distinct like silos between like front end and back end. And then as time has progressed, we've got into this more like full stack mentality. So let's hear from the rest of the panel, and maybe we can jump into a question around that. Like, is it now a blend? Is there silos anymore? Can you be only back end? So exciting stuff there. All right, Paul, do you want to kick us off next? What are your thoughts on?
It's really interesting to think about what full stack means right now, because the stack itself is fairly gigantic. As somebody who just started building like basic web pages and had no idea what an API was, I remember distinctly like coming across WebSockets and the Socket.io library. And I was like, oh, okay, I can just send messages back and forth. And I started building stuff that was just a WebSocket server and a front end. And I was just passing messages back and forth. I wasn't doing anything RESTful. And at the time, I had no idea what REST even meant, right? All I knew is like, I got to get data from the front end to the back somewhere, like to a database. And so for me, full stack right now looks like anything you want it to be honest. Like you can use a database that is managed, or you can use one that is now serverless. You can use one through a GraphQL server API now. And so it's really taken on a very wide range of what full stack means, because as I get even more and more into how applications work, eventually you're like, oh, okay, now I have to pop down below the application and into like maybe some of the networking. And when you're trying to scale out your application, then you have to think about, oh my gosh, like how am I going to route all this stuff? And today, with new like cloud tools and cloud services, it's getting I wouldn't say easier, because you still have to learn that specific cloud platform, but they have created more happy paths for developers. Like if you wire up your front end through an API gateway to a Lambda function that also calls an S3 bucket, like that's a very clearly defined stack and path that you can go through. And I think the challenge for today's full stack developers is understanding like sort of which stack you want to be full of, right? Like there's so many different ways to connect a browser to a server right now.
Fantastic. Benoit, do you want to give us your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that full stack has evolved a lot in the past few years. I remember back in the days writing code full stack in PHP maybe, and I would write everything in the same code, in the same request. Even like we had a query or responding with a front end, and then when you posted a form, it would just code that back and do the backend processing and respond with the front end with all the forms and stuff and everything, all monolith based basically. Then we evolved a bit. We started splitting the front end and the back end. Like for instance, some frameworks like Next or React, Angular came up, and we started writing code for the front end, the back end separately. But maybe the front end would still be served by the same servers that host the back end as well. I remember doing that definitely. And that would still be a problem, because if anything broke, well, everything would start failing, and it could just break everything. I think now with serverless approach, we can totally split everything, and it's much easier to separate the front end and the back end, and even you're now able to serve everything serverlessly. Your front end is on S3, probably backed by a CloudFront CDN. Your back end is written in some serverless fashion, maybe with an API gateway. Paul mentioned GraphQL earlier. And I think that GraphQL is also, but maybe that's another topic for later. GraphQL actually was, in my opinion, a game changer for front-end development to consume what the backend is trying to tell the front end and vice versa.
Yeah, noted. Okay, so with that, Ro, what are your thoughts on what a full stack cloud developer looks like today?
Yeah, I don't think there's been a better time in history for anybody to become a full stack developer, than now, because I remember back in about 2013 where I had the task of creating an application. So I had to build up the back end in PHP, and then I had to wrap it up. I had to consume that back end with an Android application, and it was really difficult. It was time consuming, and I had a lot of issues. But fast forward to about 2016, where Firebase came through, where you could just wrap up the API in your Android app, and it saves the data for you. And then they released Cloud Functions, where you could actually make your app event-driven. And then Amplify came through. So it's as time went by, the barriers to become a full stack developer kept on, reducing. So now it's way easier to develop and put out maybe an MVP of your application, quicker than before. So.
Yeah, no, this is I think this is a really great first topic to kick things off with, because it feels like it's kind of the base level, foundation level of how everything else kind of goes. So things that I was thinking about as each one of y'all were talking. The first one that came to mind, kicking it off from Michael in the mention of Node.js. The question comes up: is choosing a backend language that isn't Node.js, is that a risk? Because you have front-end developers that are probably working with JavaScript, and then you have backend developers that might have been using Java or C# or Go or something like that. However, the front-end developers then don't have an easy route to then stepping into the backend. And so will everything be JavaScript in the future? Is it a risk to choose something that isn't Node.js when choosing a backend and building today? Whoever wants to take it, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I can do.
Go ahead.
Right. Yeah, sure. I think there's no real reason to actually go with a language for the back end or the front end. I think the team whoever does that should choose the language they prefer and they master the most. In the case that you are having two teams, if you're doing it all yourself, keeping and sticking to the same language probably has a lot of benefits, because you don't have to mind shift between one language and another. And I think there's also one great benefit, and regardless of if you're doing it all yourself or you have different teams, using the same language for front end and back end has some benefits. Like you can definitely share some libraries and some modules from the back end and the front end. I'm thinking validation, for instance. You could pre-validate your forms and the data in the front end and let the front end know immediately without hitting the back end. But you still want to protect your back end against maybe bad users trying to hack into the system. And you can still use the same validation library and definitions from the front end, and having to just write it once. So that kind of stuff definitely gives some advantages on sticking to the same language.
Yeah, I want to say that what's cool about modern like serverless architectures is that if you do it where you treat all of your executable functions as really individual pieces of code that just run through API gateway, you can actually mix and match runtimes without any problem. Like in a single application, you could have Node.js on a couple of functions, Python on another couple of functions, Deno on a couple of functions, and like use the language and the libraries and the runtime for what they are meant for. I'm just now starting to figure out Python, and it's horribly like complicated to me because I've never done it before. I don't understand any of the environments, but there are other people who have already like pre-packed it up and put it in like a runtime for me, and I just like type out like print praise cage and it'll do it for me. So now I can leverage all the cool machine learning pre-done models and just like include them in the function. And I have no idea how Python works. I mean, I barely have an idea of how Node.js works, but I really don't know how Python works. But you can use them both together. If I hit a post endpoint and I say post my blog with some JSON, great. If I say post my model with some binary, great. Like it'll send it straight through, and you can mix and match. So I don't really think there is some benefit, obviously, to understanding the same language on the front and the back while you're doing your full stacky thing. But with serverless functions, you can really mix and match and take advantage of the ephemeral compute of the cloud.
Love it, love it. Yeah, I think Benoit hit the nail on the head. Is it a risk? I wouldn't really call it that. I would say it's more of a consideration. You're playing with factors like, what is your team size? What does that cohesion look like? If everybody is a JavaScript developer, then of course it makes sense. But if you have members of your team that write in Java, write in Go, or any of these other supported runtimes, then that also is perfectly valid. Now, it's a consideration because you do have to play that card of, okay, we're writing our Lambda function in Java. That's going to inherit a longer cold start, incur more memory usage. Should we just upscale and put something out there in Rust or PowerShell or any of these other crazy fast languages? Or is JavaScript a safe middle ground that we should migrate to? So I'd say if you're a sole developer and you know JavaScript and you're which makes you inherently somewhat familiar with Node.js, I would say your safe bet is to stick with that. If you have a team size where the languages are mixed, then you have that conversation of, well, who's going to be the owner of this backend service? And we'll probably skew a little bit more towards that and the upkeep from there. Great question.
Well, yeah, so I think I'll go with Benoit on this one, because I think that having the same language for the front end and the back end is very important, because it comes down to the team size, who is good at what. And also, for me, I've developed most of my applications alone, so I would say I'm a sole developer, and that mind shift. Even though I understand Node.js and maybe Python a little bit, I can do both, a little bit of both, but I would like to stick to one language on both the front end and the back end, so that I don't get too confused with the language, and I can easily share stuff between them. So I think sticking to one thing, one runtime is great.
And actually, we're talking more about just more than front end, back end. We also could talk about infrastructure as code. We're talking CDK, scripts that you could run to execute some actions and do stuff. Basically, you could write everything in JavaScript if you wanted to, or Python, whatever works for you.
I made a joke tweet the other day, and I said it's the year 2034, and you're like retiring React for WonderScript, and the cache is now multi-dimensional, and Unfortunately, even in the other dimension, DNS still takes a while to propagate. So all of your runtime efficiencies are moot.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Yeah, no, I think this was a great conversation, and part of the reason this question was thought about is that I feel very fortunate that the thing that I learned was I learned Java first, I guess, but I was also learning JavaScript, of course. And like y'all said, you want to write scripts, infrastructure as code now, CDK. You want to do some backend stuff or some front end stuff, you can kind of do all of it with a little bit of JavaScript. And so if I was personally going to like design a team, I might, if I was at a company as like a VP of engineering, I might try to skew towards JavaScript, both for the front end and the back end, allowing somebody like playing the role of putting myself earlier in my career where I was maybe only front end, and then that gave me an ability to go towards the back end versus having to like learn like Java, Spring Boot or something at like a level, that I feel like like JavaScript being on both kind of levels of the playing field maybe a little bit to like be able to jump roles and touch more things. And so that was a really interesting question. That brings us to our second question here, which is, if you're starting to build a web application today, mid 2022, what does that stack consist of? And taking into consideration backend, front end, deployment, hosting, as full stack cloud developers, which I would say we all are. I think probably all of us have our own, opinion about how you would build something today. So what is that, and who wants to get that question off?
Ooh, opinions. I can go first. So if I build full stack applications today, so I'm going to say my weapon of choice is going to be Amplify, and then throw in like an asterisk. That asterisk being Amplify plus extensibility, coming from either the CDK or just how Amplify handles it within its own opinionated framework, which I think we're going to talk about in a later question. But yeah, that's what I'm using. One of the popular frameworks, I'm probably going to lean more towards Next.js on the web, meaning React, but I'm going to be hosting it all, hosting, deployments, front end, back end, database, all within Amplify, and mixing in the CDK as needed.
Yeah, it's always interesting to think about different stacks, and like I'm always trying to chase the perfect stack, and you realize like there won't ever be one, because in the real world you end up having to support a bunch of stuff that's just not compatible with your stack. But if I were starting something brand new by myself, maybe one or two people, I would definitely start with the idea of deploying onto AWS, probably using something like Architect. That would give me a direct, like, all-in-one. I'd have my database, I'd have my static assets, I'd have a front-end pipeline, I'd have REST APIs, like all together in one, using Architect. If it was just going to be like static sites and you want to go full Jamstacky, like I would totally go like Netlify, because their tooling and the way that they've kind of pulled together all of the Git ops, as it were, is just really nice to work with. They've put a lot of thought and effort into it. And if you've had a chance to play with like Astro, it's really cool the way that they've come up with how to build these front end experiences all together. And I think one thing that I want to mention about this idea of going full stack is that, like, at first I thought like, oh, okay, I can make an Express server that will serve some HTML pages, and like I'm full stack. As I got more and more experience, I realized like, oh my God, I have to now, like, as soon as you go into the back end, as soon as you make that request over the wire, you now have to like think about so much more about security and latency and how many freaking proxies there are in front of every request, and just so much more extra engineering thought has to go into it. And serverless does a really good job of getting rid of a lot of that and saying like, hey, AWS, like, you take care of scaling, you take care of load balancing, you take care of of moving these processes around. And I think that enables front-end folks to easily like keep getting more and more power into the back end. So yeah, architect's probably my choice.
Okay, I'll go next. Well, if I had to start a new project, my stack would probably be for the backend AppSync, of course, deployed probably by either service framework, possibly as well by the CDK. That could be an option. Front end, I'm not a big front end developer. I know how to do it. I'm not just a big lover of front end development. But if I had to do it, I would go with React, something like that. I'm not sure how I would deploy it, but I would deploy it to S3 backed by CloudFront. Yeah, and if I had to build a mobile app, I would go with React Native.
Rob, what do you think? Oh, I think your mic's on mute.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Oh,
You can
man.
tell us prolific,
I'm
though.
always on mute. Okay, so when I started building building serverless applications, I used Amplify, because it's just this. I think it's like a Trojan horse. It has all of these components that you can just use in your application, and it's really great. It just has a complete stack to actually put out my application a lot quicker. So if there's any advice I can give anybody trying to build an application now and mid 2022, and if they want to put it out really quick, I think they should go with Amplify, because it saves you, even though it's kind of a black box inside, but it saves you a lot of stress trying to figure out everything, put everything together on your own. So I think Amplify will be a way to go for me, both for the web application and the mobile application, because I do web with Vue and mobile with Flutter. So I'll go with that.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, and I'll give my thing's kind of a hybrid of what everyone else said already. But I would go with React JS, and it's completely based on my own experience as well. That's the big caveat. It's that my opinion is heavily skewed based on me not wanting to learn something new right now. But it's React JS. We use the serverless framework for both the front end and back end deployments. Definitely on AWS using AppSync. Would have Node.js lambdas connected to AppSync, DynamoDB for the database interactions. And then if I didn't need SEO, I would use CloudFront and S3 hosting with just the static website hosting. Otherwise, as other people said, probably Next.js to be able to have that SEO factor as well, because it has to be server-side rendering. So maybe like Lambda at Edge. And then maybe GitHub Actions, because I'd probably be doing the work on GitHub, probably not Bitbucket. And I wouldn't want to work on the code pipeline side too heavily, towards the beginning. So with that, that's a lot. And thank you, each one of y'all, for basically giving your opinion on this.
Real quick, did you say Lambda connected to AppSync with DynamoDB on the other end?
Well, Lambda's connected to AppSync, and then, well, it depends, because if you could do the CRUD operations directly to DynamoDB from AppSync, then that works. But if I have to do more complex stuff, I draw a line with the BTL. Yeah, I draw a line with the BTL.
I was like, that's a hot take.
Yeah. I saw where you're going, if anybody's out there listening, we didn't just have a conversation right there, but Michael and I were basically communicating. Verbally. Yeah. So with that, super interesting stuff. Going to the next question here. Let's see. I think this is. Oh, here we have one from Almir. I'm going to save your Almir, because we will jump into Amplify right in a second, and then I think we'll be able to talk about that question. I just asked that one. There you go. what are the biggest benefits of being a full stack cloud developer? So whoever wants to take that, feel free. I'm assuming this question, I'm an audience member. Maybe I have front end skill, back end skill. I'm exploring the idea of what a full stack cloud developer is. Why should I do it? What's the benefit?
I think that the biggest one is money. I think it's one of those topics we don't like to we don't bring up a lot. We like to humble ourselves and give some altruistic feeling, but no, like it's okay. The money, your earning potential goes up, right? You have that much more knowledge, and then maybe if I'm numbering these off, aside from the money, you can just get into communication style. Right? You have that much more of a barrier that's decreased because now you can communicate with front end, you can communicate with back end. So when things go wrong, and they always do, you can handle them a bit more gracefully and be a part of those conversations. Those are the two biggest ones. But then there's more codey stuff that we can get into. But for me, it's all about, hey, I can make more money, and then I can talk to more people.
It's definitely a way to expand your opportunities for sure. As someone who can do the interface, as well as the back end business logic, as well as handle all the database type stuff that you got to think about, and organizing the data models. Like it's a lot more to learn, but there's also that added opportunity for you to be able to jump in and out of different situations that are coming up on whatever application you're building. You'll be able to understand like, oh, okay, on the front end, we're accepting this data and it's not typed correctly. And by the time it hits the database freaks out, and now you know why and where to catch all the validation errors. Or if on the back end, it's timing out for whatever reason because you're calling a third-party API that takes forever to return. Now, if you're on the front end, it just looks like this error. But if you know how to trace that signal all the way through your full stack, you're going to get better answers. You're going to be able to go to your org and say like, hey, third party, like when we make a request to you, it's timing out. Like what's going on, and you can show them your server logs, you can show them your Lambda logs and stuff like that. It's just more opportunity for you to really dive into the application and provide value, and that's how you get paid more, because you're able to do more.
Yeah, absolutely agree with both of you. Knowing how everything works is definitely a benefit, because you can know how everything stitches together and how they interact with each other. And I don't think you need to be like super full stack and know everything, but at least know a little bit of one or the other. If you, I don't know, if you prefer backend and you're specializing in backend, at least know a little bit of front end, or vice versa. I have a perfect example for that. I remember not so long ago working on a project for a client. I was building the back end, they were building the front end. Problem, front end was built in for iOS in Swift. I have zero knowledge of Swift. I had access to the code and I could access it and see it. I was trying to debug something and I couldn't understand any of the front end. So I couldn't debug it. I had to rely on them to actually do the debugging, tell me what's wrong. Okay, the backend is responding with an invalid response. That field is wrong. It's a string. It should be an integer, whatever. So I couldn't do it myself, and I had to rely on them, which added some friction, delays in actually understanding the bugs and the issues that we had. So yeah, in that case, that was a blocker for me, not to understand the front end. So maybe I should learn Swift.
Yeah, so I think I'll go Michael on this one. It comes down to money. It's basically that's the first thing for me. And then the second thing is I like to see the application completely. So I like to always build the front end to test the back end to see how my back end works. So the first So it comes down to money, and then the second thing is just me trying to get a complete view of what I've built so that I can show you, because I cannot actually show you, I cannot show a layman back-end code. All they can see are visuals, all they can really appreciate are visuals. I cannot go to my mom and be like, hey, this, look at this beautiful back-end, API I've written. But I can actually show her, like a Facebook feed that I've maybe replicated. So it's connected to my backend, and these are the feeds. And maybe she can post a picture and actually see it come up. So that's another way of me, showcasing my skill to a layman, somebody who doesn't really understand what's going on. So it comes down to those two.
Yeah, love it. And yeah, that's something with my, I've always tried to contemplate like how, or I have these conversations with my grandma too, which is like, what does Ryan do? And it's like, I kind of work on TVs, like, cause it's like, my grandma doesn't have a smartphone. She doesn't have an email. She doesn't have like cable. She has like a dish or whatever that's like, the wires and the tinfoil on top, and a flip phone, where she doesn't save numbers because she doesn't know how to do that. So she writes them down on paper. So, shout out to my grandma. And so, yeah, it's really hard to explain like any backend stuff. I always think about it like, I explain it like if you have a house or a building, it's like the wiring behind the walls that, there's a lot that goes into making a building, not just the interior decoration. But at the same time, as y'all said, like you can't really appreciate how great the wiring is because you can't really see it. But yeah, for this question, at least on my end, it was also like, it was money driven. It was also, I was in a code school in Portland, and I heard about cloud. I heard about the salaries in cloud. I also heard that serverless was new. And that was one of the biggest reasons that I jumped on it, was because I didn't want to go to the back of the line learning Java and then be competing against people in the marketplace that have 15 years of experience. 2017, when I was learning serverless, really with the API gateway coming around in 2016, there wasn't a ton, like you couldn't have 5 years of experience in serverless and Lambda and API gateway and so on. And you could make that same argument with any of the front end tools like Amplify that we're talking about. The experience.
Tell that to the recruiters.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, so that was a big thing, is that I wanted to be competitive, and I wanted to have a skill set where in 6 months I could be pretty experienced, even compared to people that have been doing it for multiple years, which turned out to be true. Also, making ideas a reality. I always like having an idea and being a backend developer, but then not being able to visualize it. Oh my gosh, how frustrating is that? Like, so, even something yesterday, I did a little mock-up of this like serverless casino thing where they push a button and it just like rolls the dice or something and then comes back. And it's like a very simple front end, but have a back end, and maybe I'll do a course or something about how to build it. But if I didn't have both of those skill sets, I wouldn't be able to do training courses, because I couldn't, I couldn't show the other side of it, how it all fits together. You couldn't show people what you're doing and the money. Yeah. So amazing. Awesome. Okay, well, I think the other question, which was asked about like full stack development and enterprise level, does anybody, we could take that question towards the end too. If anybody feels like they want to take it.
What does it say?
It's does full stack exist at an enterprise level because of security, scaling, caching, and overall increased complexity on both front end and back end? Or is it like, is full stack done more at a startup or like a startup-esque level? Can you do everything, I guess, like at an enterprise level?
Oh yeah.
Or do you have to niche down?
So I would say the answer to the question at face value is that yes, full stack exists at any app of meaningful size. You're gonna have a front end, a visual interface. You're gonna have and that visual interface could be an Arduino board or some IoT device. We just use web because that's the easiest for us to work in. But then you're also going to have data being sent back and forth at your API layer, and then you typically want to store that data. So you have your database. So the answer is yeah. It's just, what does it look like? Are we using on-prem servers? Are we going serverless? Is it a website or is it some other interface that your customers interact with? So it definitely exists. It's just, what does the model look like?
It definitely can happen, and even with all of these different levels of complexity, like security and caching and all of that, using the event-driven model and cloud services, one developer can take on more parts of the stack. But also, we have the ability now to create these unique architectures that sort of can say, like, all right, when my browser makes a request, it's going to go to this backend for the front end, which then proxies it to another older, longer living service, right? Or it can take a request from the client and pump it onto a queue or something. And that really expands the options and the choices that a front end developer could actually make. Like, I need to get this data. How am I going to get it? They can tap into different architectures using stuff in the cloud that we just didn't have before.
Yeah. Okay. So yes. So it sounds like it can exist at enterprise level, and we definitely see that take place in various apps, and then potentially based on what you're doing, you may have to almost like narrow down your focus, because I know that almost anything you do in cloud, you could probably build, like, if you're just going to do DynamoDB access patterns, you could probably like be the best DynamoDB access person in the entire world and then get paid crazy amounts of money to just do that one thing, so that's really fun. Okay, well, I don't want to keep going too far on this one topic, because we have two more to go. The next topic that we have today, very exciting, AWS Amplify. I remember using AWS Amplify a long time ago, and I almost felt like it didn't go far enough. And then since then, it's been many years. So I know that Michael has his ear to the ground. You know all about AWS Amplify. So AWS Amplify for production, what are we looking at? What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely customers probably share that very same experience. And just for a little bit of context, the way that AWS typically releases products historically is that they put it out there, they gather customer feedback, which means that first iteration is really just to solve a specific customer need. Now, for those of you that don't know what Amplify is, it's an opinionated framework where you can bring in your front-end tooling, and we take a front-end approach to introduce developers to the cloud. So we don't say things like, hey, I'm going to add a Lambda function. You just do Amplify add Lambda if you're using our CLI. Or if you want to choose between a REST API or authentication, you say Amplify add API, and you don't really have to focus on what's going on under the hood. It takes care of all of that for you. Like Rose said, it authenticates that, but it's not so much as a black box. It uses CloudFormation under the hood, as well as CDK integrations to provision all of those resources. Now, that's the context of it. To answer your question of whether or not you can use it in production, yes. We have several customers already doing so, that have been doing so. And from where it started to where it is now is the result of many customer iterations or customer feedback sessions and iterations into the product itself. So I'm saying, yeah, I'm sure we can. There are plenty of stories that go into maybe issues that may have happened in the past, depending on what you're doing. But I think the biggest one was that customers had a hard time of extending Amplify. There was the happy path, but then it was like, what happened when you got off of that happy path? And now we've introduced things like extensibility. Now you can make your own VTL resolvers if you're using AppSync. So you can do plenty of interesting things, and we could talk about that more as the others chime in.
I think the coolest part about things like Amplify is the ability for the front end folks to start experiencing infrastructure as code. There's a lot of people who I come across that still don't know about infrastructure as code and how powerful it can be. I think the biggest changes in Amplify are around its integration with CDK, and the idea that CDK is getting like bigger and bigger and more encompassing is actually pretty cool. One of the questions was like, what will serverless be like in 3 years? I know we're talking about Amplify right now, but I definitely think more and more time and energy will be put into making your infrastructure as code even more declarative over time, and doing things like Amplify does. Like, I just want an API, just type like Amplify add, type tool add, tool give me thing, right? And for a front end developer to be able to just declare like what his cloud resources are going to be to back this application is really, really powerful. And that's what makes it production ready, right? That's when you write your code, you write your infrastructure as code, you check it in, and now somebody else from your team can just pick it up and run exactly from where you left off. I mean, that's the kind of power and local development environment that not all front end folks have experienced yet. You know, like, how long does it take for you to get all your tools ready, right? How long does it take to get your environment ready? And I think there's still lots of room for improvement on local tooling.
Yeah. My last experience with Amplify was from maybe 2-3 years ago, when I started getting interested into AppSync. It was interesting. I think it's really interesting, but my big problem with it is that it's still very opinionated. And as soon as you need to customize something, at least back in the days, it was really, really hard or impossible. I think now there's been some improvements, and I think Amplify deserves maybe a second look from me. But as far as I know, and let me know if I'm wrong, Michael, customization is maybe still a bit complex. I don't know. I feel like customization requires writing pure CloudFormation code in most cases. So that could become complex as soon as you have a lot of moving pieces. You need to create more and more resources. While with other solutions, maybe with the CDK or service framework, those customization are actually out of the box, and they require you to actually customize. They do abstract the heavy lifting, the hard parts like IAM permissions, creating stuff under the hood that you don't want to write in CloudFormation yourself, but you still have to configure all the base, your data sources, resolvers in the case of AppSync. You still have to write your VTL, or of course your Lambda, or at least hook your Lambda to your resolver or your VTL to your resolver. And I think, yeah, that's more work. If you are new, that's maybe something hard to do, but it forces you to actually do it yourself. And you know how it's going to behave because you control it. I think one of my problems with Amplify was that I was afraid that the next time I hit Amplify deploy or whatever function command you have to run, it would actually compile to something different that I actually meant in the past, because everything is generated, VTL generated. So if the framework decides to change the VTL for some reason, you might break something. So that was one of the things I was afraid of. Now I know it's evolved quite a lot, and of course, to also for this kind of stuff, you write integration tests and everything. But yeah, I think Amplify is still great for beginners, in my opinion, to get something up and running really, really quickly and not worry about how it works. Then later you can actually get into CloudFormation or the console, see how everything was actually put together and understand how they connect to each other and everything is put together. And from there, you can start customizing and extracting stuff. But I'm afraid that once you start with Amplify, then ejecting from that and moving to something else might be a bit harder. But yeah, I guess maybe for proof of concept as well, could be easy to get something up and running really quickly, and then maybe move to something else.
To answer your question on, or to chime in on one of the points that you made. So when you do want to customize Amplify, previously it was you had to go in and you had to mess with the CloudFormation, which again, if you're a front-end developer, you just don't want to do that. Now though, say you had an SNS topic or an SQS queue that you wanted to add in front of your API. Now we don't support SNS and SQS out of the box. That's not part of our core services. So instead of adding all 200 plus services into the CLI, we said, you know what, let our customers run the command amplify add custom. And you now have the choice of saying, do you want to add CloudFormation or use CloudFormation to add this, or do you want to jump into the CDK? And what we now provide is this way. I don't like using escape hatch or ejecting, because when I think of an escape hatch, I think of like a sunken submarine where like you're drowning and you're trying to get out. It really is just this added customizability where you have CDK, like many of us enjoy using, but now it's Amplify aware. It knows that you have an Amplify project, even though you're still writing CDK, and it scaffolds it all for you. So I would say 2 years is a lot of time in serverless years to not have used Amplify, and I would encourage you to maybe give it another go and let me know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, sure.
I think the other point was that it can be tough. One, front-end developers don't want to jump into VTL to begin with. It's traditionally kind of an API thing, and Amplify takes you on this guided approach where it'll make those connections for you, but it is opinionated, and sometimes that isn't what you want to get in your application. So again, listening to our customers, we say, cool, like we have our own dist folder that has your VTL resolvers. If you like 90% of it, but not that 10%, copy it over to a build directory. That will take place and override the distribution folder. So now you can have things like single table design, where all those IAM permissions are managed, but now it's tweaked. It's using different primary keys and different GSIs that you might want to have in your project. So we're getting there, and I'd love to hear what you think of it now that it's been a little bit.
Yeah, and I will. And I think the CDK integration is definitely cool, because one of my biggest problem was actually that extending Amplify. I wanted to add an S3 bucket, SNS, SQS, whatever. How do I do that?
Yeah.
Back in the days, I couldn't, unless I wrote actually CloudFormation, which was a no-no. So yeah, I will have definitely a different look at it.
Rob?
Yeah. So yeah. I'm not on mute now. So I'm an avid user of I'm an avid Amplify user. It kind of leaves a bittersweet taste, in my mouth, because the sweet part is that it makes me, push out my applications a lot quicker. And then the bitter part is that the plugins for my for the framework I use sometimes are not well supported. So I always get conflicts. It's always difficult to just put everything together and get up and running as quick as possible. But overall, Amplify is a good way. I mean, I think for me, if I want to push out an app really quick, I would go with Amplify any day.
Yeah, awesome. My opinion is almost like no opinion, just because, being completely transparent, I have a set of skills. I already know how to do something a certain way. So for me, making the entire thing on a serverless framework is trivial, because we have so many templates already built up, and we have so many projects that we've already done, that we can just kind of slap some stuff together, copy paste. I know where to put that stuff, and then we can just build the same thing equivalent of Amplify, but then you still have that low level management of it. And I haven't tried Amplify for a while. So I would say though, same as everybody else, if you're new to cloud, or if you just want to build a POC and you don't have those templates already built up in a specific one like SAM or CDK or serverless framework, etc., then definitely try out Amplify. And I can't speak on the production side either. So that's my non-opinion is it seems like it's potentially a path forward. And I love to hear that there's updates like the custom thing, because I know that having to look at the generated Amplify CloudFormation directly and then try to parse out what was going on like a couple of years ago was like really tough. So the fact that that's been worked on and probably will continue to be worked on, that's super encouraging. So thanks for that insight, Michael, as well.
Oh, for sure. Just to speak on like the other aspect, I know we're getting close on time, I think. Serverless framework integrations, you can absolutely use Amplify with serverless framework. I think one of the things I don't want to conflate is that Amplify is a tool chain. It's not a wholesale product. So a lot of customers, they write their code in serverless framework or CDK, and they keep that separate. And then they use Amplify's libraries to tie that into their front-end application, or they host their application on Amplify to get that CI/CD experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the Amplify.js, I forgot to mention that. I think it's still great, and I've used it in the past. It integrates perfectly with AppSync, and it's very easy to use, and subscriptions just work out of the box. One issue that I had with Serverless Framework was to actually generate that, how's it called, the AWS export file. There was, back in the days, there was a plugin, Serverless Framework plugin, that generated that one. I think it's unmaintained and it's been archived. So I had some issues in the past to actually have that connected to Amplify, the front-end library.
Yeah,
apart from that, it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that too, because like when I was listing out like React and serverless framework and AWS and AppSync, and let's say Cognito authentication, Amplify like front end library is like 100% the route. I don't know if I would necessarily use the custom authentication like stuff that Amplify gives, but I might write my own using the Amplify library. But Amplify library is always present. I just don't use the full CI/CD aspect of it, or the hosting aspect, or the CLI aspect. So, but it's super helpful. Okay, we have some questions in the chat, and I know we had one more topic, event-driven applications for front-end devs. I know we're coming to time as well, so maybe we can save that one for another panel and try to talk to the people in chat real quick. First one here, we've got Amir. Finally getting back up to Amir. Why would I choose Amplify before Firebase if I want a full stack cloud platform? So, what are your thoughts?
I'd say if you know Firebase really well, or you know that, I won't get in trouble by saying stick with Firebase. Like if that's your weapon of choice, and you're already making money from it and all that good stuff, stick with Firebase. But if you're evaluating both on an equal playing field, I would say some things that would differentiate your application from a Firebase experience. One would just be pricing, right? When you start working with managed serverless services, you do get the fun of having the AWS experience, which I like to say is you price one way, and then over time it just kind of gets cheaper and better. It's kind of like how AWS likes to do things. It's just like you won't have to do anything to your application. It'll just get cheaper or faster. Another thing is that as with Firebase, one of the cool things that they have about it is their mapping solution. But then now we also have maps within Amplify as well. So if you want to do like cool geocoding stuff, we have Amazon Location Service, which ties into EventBridge. And you kind of get a little bit more of that kind of segueing into the last question, that event-driven architecture experience. And then also you get our full experience where we have a UI component library where you can easily add in a map. It's fully connected to AWS, whether you use just vanilla JavaScript or a React component. There's tons of reasons, but I'll actually transfer this over to the others on the panel.
in my opinion, I think it doesn't really matter which one you use. As Michael said, use the one you prefer. I do have one example of one personal experience I want to share. Is I think Firebase was a great fit and really easy to use for push-based notifications on mobile apps. It's super easy to use, super easy to integrate in Android or iOS, and it was a great experience to actually work with. It just works out of the box. Apart from that, I usually stick to AWS with anything not related to push notifications. So for databases, I would use DynamoDB, Lambda, and instead of Google Functions or whatever.
Paul, Ro, any opinion on this one?
It's been a while since I've used Firebase, so I haven't given it a super deep look very recently. I had built some cool stuff on it a few years ago, and I think it really does come down to just making a cloud vendor choice. You know, it's if you're more familiar with one or the other, then you go for it. If you're not familiar with either, watch a bunch of YouTube tutorials and see which one makes more sense to you, because that's where it comes down to right now with all these different tools, is the ability of the communities and the tool makers to be able to explain their value to the developers, and just, you know, kind of going by the stuff I can find out there online to explain, like, why would I, and like how would I, and I guess the most important thing is figuring out what actual problem you're trying to solve with either of these deployment solutions. I know Firebase does really touts itself for its real timiness, being able to update data 2 ways. And so if you really need that sort of feature, you can look at Firebase, and with Amplify, if you really want like GraphQL hotness, like it's there. It's there for you. And I don't think it's a bad choice either way.
Yeah, I just think it really comes down to what you're good at. I actually used Firebase yesterday, and I think the only reason why I'll choose Firebase over Amplify is what Benoit just highlighted: push notifications. You know, with Flutter, you know, since it's also a Google framework, you know, it's really well supported. You know, but when I try with Amplify and Flutter, no push notifications, so I need to now look at something third party. So it comes, that's where I have a big problem. And yeah, I think because Firebase supports real-time subscriptions, real-time data transfer and stuff like that, and Amplify also supports that with GraphQL subscriptions and stuff like that. So I just think it comes down to what you're good at, and then for me, sometimes I'll go with Firebase just because of push notifications. If Amplify supported that on Flutter, then I'd have swayed towards Amplify and everything. So that's just the fun.
I just remembered one of the big reasons I was using Firebase was to get a hold of Google's machine learning APIs. At the time, they had a really cool chatbot interface, and AWS at the time didn't. So I was like, okay, I'll just build, like, how do I get access to this cool machine learning API, where I literally was like sending in text and it could have a conversation with me back and forth. It was like this open dialogue thing. And AWS didn't have that kind of a solution at the time. So yeah, I built it on Firebase because I could connect it to that service. And I think that for folks that are building out solutions and are looking at different cloud services. Like that's where the vendors are really competing for innovation right now, is how easy they can provide these services for you to plug into.
Yeah, I love that. I had my certification expired on Google Cloud, but I had like 2 Google certifications, wrote a whole bunch of stuff, used Firebase quite heavily, and I've used a little bit of Amplify, as I mentioned earlier, not a ton. I would say that based on that understanding and based on my preference to make everything serverless first, AWS is like way past Google Cloud in my opinion around serverless things. And so if I was thinking more like long term, that eventually I'm going to have to outgrow or add other services in. I've tried to do, whenever you try to do a cross cloud, like y'all know what I'm talking about, you try to do cross cloud connections and stuff and build APIs that then feed data from Google Cloud over to AWS and build a complex monstrosity like that. You wish you would have just picked one and like doubled down on it, from my experience. So if I was thinking more long term like that, I'd check out Amplify. Because then it's an introduction to all these services that I think has better, cohesion and extensibility, and so on. Well, we're like past time. Thank you everybody for basically being on. I'm going to answer Michael's question, or try to real quick. How do you handle APIs with a requirement for private networking? There's tons of options on AWS. There's private API gateway endpoints. You can also do like network load balancers and create private VPCs. You can have like customer gateways with direct connections to an on-premises data center. You can do all sorts of things. You can do connections privately to S3 and other services using like interface gateways or gateway endpoints, whichever one that is specifically. So there's definitely tons of ways you can do it. Just look up maybe private API gateway endpoint, and then that'll rabbit hole you down from there. And then I think we have one more. Definitely also, Miguel, this mention here of a Discord forum. Yeah, I'm totally on board. We're going to talk about that post-call or post-webinar and think about how we can start adding a growing community through like a Discord channel, maybe the Serverless Guru runs for all of our webinars and different things. And then the last one here from Michael as well. This is a juicy one. So I'd love to get the whole panelist's opinion. Like this is the last one before we wrap up. Where do you think serverless will be in the next 3 to 5 years? Is it going away? Is it bigger? Is it the same? What do y'all think?
Yeah, I think databases are next. Big, juicy databases that don't have to, where you don't have to worry about connection pools and sockets and sharding and replication and all that stuff. I think serverless databases are still a big chunk of our experience in building apps that has to get better.
I agree. I like that. I also think the next 3 to 5 years, what we're going to be seeing is a whole lot of primitive layering. We're seeing that now a little bit, right? With frameworks like Amplify, where it brings in a bunch of these services and sort of provides a wrapper around them. But then even a step further with step functions and Event Bridge being a wrapper around CloudWatch. So 3 to 5 years, I think a lot more primitives, creating more services under the hood. And then also the tooling, because the big thing right now is, how do we test this stuff? How do we make sure that when it does fail, it fails gracefully? Those are going to be the big focuses. I think we got a good handle on what to expect when you're working with a managed serverless service. But then, how do I do all the things that I would expect in a production grade application? Like testing is the big one for me.
Yeah, I agree. Testing is one of the biggest pain point of serverless. I think tooling is definitely one thing we need to improve in the next few years, and hopefully it's going to get better. And I think serverless is just going to grow more and more, and that will bring interest into it, and hopefully should bring more work by the community or by companies on serverless focused tooling for development happiness, let's say. And I think maybe serverless as well is still not always the default choice for all new companies. I think there's still a big unknown, or I mean, companies still are not always aware of serverless, so they don't necessarily go with it for a greenfield project, and that's something we will probably see more and more in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I think serverless will grow. Will actually move from cloud formation to something like more object-oriented approaches like CDK. Because I keep saying this thing. So I keep saying that cloud formation will be the assembly language in 5 years from now, and I think more observability solutions will pop up. Because there's already a market, not even a market. Yeah, there's already a market for it now, and I think by then, so I think a lot of observability solutions will pop up, and we'll get to write more serverless applications with object-oriented code as IAC instead of CloudFormation.
Love it. Okay, yeah, and my final take on that is more abstractions, as everyone else said. Definitely need more tooling and testing. Completely agree. I think the abstraction layers are going to get better and better over time. There's going to be more like no code, low code type of like platforms that are coming out. Platforms that are generating CDK, generating SAM, generating CloudFormation, generating Terraform for you based on very simple inputs, serverless framework as well. And overall, I think there's going to be hockey stick shaped growth, right? Because I think where we've been, I thought we were going to be here by 2022, where there would be much more mainstream adoption of serverless by and large. But I heard, don't quote me on any of this, but I heard that out of all the IT companies that are out there, like 10% are actually on cloud. And then I would throw out a random percentage, which is not real. And this is not coming from Michael, so AWS can't say anything. Maybe 5% of those people, so 7% of the 10% that are on cloud are on AWS. And then let's say 5% are actively working with serverless every day. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe out of the 100% that would be on AWS, maybe it's less than 10% or something. And so that's interesting because as more mainstream adoption happens in all these areas, there's no better time to learn serverless and learn full stack cloud development with AWS and so on than right now today. Because as the abstractions come on top, if you knew about CloudWatch events and they came out with EventBridge, sweet. If you're doing polling Lambdas for SQS and there wasn't a direct integration with Lambda yet, and then they add that in, awesome. Now you understand both and you know how to build even more complex things. So definitely learn it, definitely start today. Whew, with that was the serverless panel on full stack cloud development. Thank every one of y'all panelists for being with us today. Thank you, audience, for being with us today. Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Anything that anybody wants to shout out? Feel free.
I'm going to segue into a self plug. So the education, I think, is going to be one thing that is definitely going to happen within the next 3 to 5 years. And I don't just mean YouTube channels, but I also mean within the colleges themselves. I can say factually that one of the investments that you'll be seeing is serverless being a path, a gateway within the university. That way, when they graduate, there's more than just computer science and front-end development. There's a grasp on what's happening in the real world. But with that, if you do want to get a leg up, you could definitely follow my YouTube channel. Oh, perfect timing. Where I post tons of serverless content. From there, that'll take you to my blog as well, where you can see my prolific and not so prolific thoughts on tutorials, serverless, Amplify, etc. But yeah, that's it. That's all I have to plug.
Okay.
Awesome.
Else?
Just want to say thanks to everyone who watched this and participated, and I love chatting about all this tech. And yeah, hit me up on Twitter at Paul Chin Jr. Praise Cage.
I just want to answer Michael's question. I think was about AppSync. If you can have a, I think, private endpoint with AppSync, as of now, the answer is unfortunately no. It's currently not possible. So yeah, apart from that, thank you for one, and see you next time.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.
Okay. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
All right.